My name is Claire Monroe, and I never thought my story would begin with a lie dressed in gold. The wedding invitation came in the mail on a Thursday, heavy cream paper, embossed in elegant cursive, sealed with a wax stamp that shimmered under the morning sun. You are cordially invited to the union of Daniel Monroe and Eliza Bennett. It read. The date, October 22nd. The venue, a botanical garden just outside the city. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I clutched the card as if it were something sacred. Daniel is my only sibling. My only brother. We grew up sharing bunk beds, holiday traditions, and childhood secrets. But over the years, things had changed, or maybe they had always been this way. And I was just too naive to see it. I'd been left out of a lot over the years, family photos, dinners, birthdays. Sometimes I'd get a text hours after an event had ended. Wish you were here, they'd say. Like an afterthought. But I always gave them the benefit of the doubt. Told myself it was a scheduling error. A mistake. Maybe a miscommunication. I never wanted to believe they'd exclude me on purpose. That wedding invitation. It felt like a lifeline. Maybe I was finally being seen. Maybe this was the olive branch I'd waited years for. I went all in. I picked out a deep sapphire dress, bought a heartfelt wedding gift, and even booked a hotel room near the resort venue. I told myself, this is the moment things change. This is my way back into the family. I didn't know then that it was a trap disguised as hope. The day before the wedding, I visited my Aunt Margot, the one family member who had always been kind to me. Margot was the kind of woman who knew how to read a room in seconds and always offered tea before judgment. I wanted to show her the engraved cufflinks I'd bought for Daniel. She had always admired my thoughtfulness. She welcomed me in, though I noticed the tightness in her smile. I can't wait for tomorrow, I told her, nearly bouncing on my heels. Margot hesitated. Claire, have you been well? She asked gently, then offered me a seat. I nodded, though something in her tone unsettled me. While she made tea in the kitchen, I noticed a leather-bound photo album on the coffee table. Curious, I flipped it open. The first photo knocked the breath from my chest. There was Daniel, standing under a canopy of fairy lights, holding Eliza's hands. He was in a tux. She wore a lace gown. The setting matched the invitation. The guests, dozens of them, looked joyous and warm. I kept flipping. There were group photos, dancing, toasts, and me. I was nowhere. Margot returned and saw my face. Her expression collapsed. Claire, she whispered, setting down the tray. I didn't know how to tell you. I couldn't even speak. My hand hovered above the album like it might burn me. The wedding was last weekend? She nodded, eyes glistening. I argued with them. I truly did. I told your parents it was cruel. I told Daniel, but he insisted. They didn't want you there. My mind couldn't make sense of it. But I got the invitation. The one that said it was tomorrow. Margot sat beside me. They sent that date just to keep you away. It felt like the ground dropped from beneath me. I left her house that afternoon with the photo album burned into my mind. Every smiling face a silent betrayal. And I knew, for the first time, that this wasn't some innocent oversight. This was intentional, strategic, heartless. That night, I didn't sleep. I drove in silence. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. Leaves swirled in little whirlwinds as I approached the familiar cottage tucked behind a line of aging sycamores, my parents' retirement home. A place filled with old memories. Once warm, now eerily quiet in my mind. Their cars were in the driveway. And next to them, Daniel's black SUV. My hands began to tremble again. Just like they did when I held that cursed invitation. I rang the bell without thinking. Laughter spilled from inside. And then, stillness. My mother opened the door. Her smile faltered. Claire? What are you doing here? I stepped into the hallway like someone returning to a war zone. Slow and uncertain, I went to Aunt Margot's. I said flatly. She showed me the photos. A visible shudder passed between my parents. Daniel appeared in the living room. Eliza beside him. Her makeup was light, her hair pulled back. They weren't dressed up, just lounging, as if nothing had happened. But the moment they saw me, the air changed. Claire, Daniel said, His voice calm, tired, almost. Look, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. Like what? I asked. Me finding out the truth? Silence. Eliza crossed her arms. My mother stepped back, avoiding eye contact. You sent me an invitation with the wrong date. I continued, voice rising now. You printed it. You mailed it. Was that a joke to you? A test? What did I do to deserve this? Daniel's expression hardened. We didn't want you there. He said simply. The words hit me like a slap. No emotion. No apology. I wanted one day. Just one perfect day where everything went right. He continued, and I knew if you came, it would complicate things. My heart began to pound. Because I'm quiet? Because I've always kept to myself? It's not just that. My mother interrupted, her voice unnervingly calm. You make people uncomfortable, Claire. You never quite fit in. You don't laugh at the same things. Don't belong in the same way. My father stood behind them both. Silent. His eyes looked tired, but he said nothing. You've always been like a ghost. My mother went on. There, but not really part of anything. We didn't want you lingering around on a day that was supposed to be joyful. Tears stung the corners of my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. I scanned each of their faces, searching for someone, anyone, who might object to this madness. But no one spoke. You felt this way for a long time? I asked. All of you? My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. That silence, his silence, was my answer. Daniel exhaled heavily. We didn't want to hurt you. But we also didn't want you to ruin the one day that really mattered. I had no words. Not at first. Just a ringing in my ears and the loud, sudden awareness that I had been foolish for far too long. They had never truly seen me. And they never wanted to. I see. I whispered. Thank you for finally saying it out loud. I turned to leave. My mother called after me. Claire, don't overreact. This doesn't mean we don't love you. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. If this is love, I said without turning back. I don't want it. I walked out, closing the door behind me without another word. The moment the latch clicked shut, something inside me uncoiled. The anger was still there, but beneath it, a deep, aching freedom. It was over. The illusion, the desperate hope, the endless waiting for acceptance. They had taken my love and turned it into a burden. Now I was ready to take it back. When I got into my car, I didn't cry. I called Aunt Margot. Claire? She answered immediately. Thank you, I said, for always being in my corner. She was quiet for a moment. Then, always, darling, you are my family. The real kind. The kind that doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. Her voice wrapped around me like a blanket. It reminded me that while my blood may have turned cold, my heart still beat with warmth. And from now on, I would protect it fiercely. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. For so long, I had bent backward, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. I brought gifts. I gave time. I paid quietly for things I knew they struggled with. I thought maybe, just maybe, my generosity would buy me a seat at the table. But it never did. So I made a decision. One that wasn't rooted in revenge or rage, but something far more powerful, clarity. It was time to stop carrying the weight of people who chose to forget me. The next morning, I called Diane Brooks, my attorney. Diane had handled my property investments for the past 4 years, sharp, discreet, fiercely protective of her clients. I need to untangle myself from my family, I said, skipping the small talk. Her voice didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. I told her about the invitation, the lies, the financial support I'd been quietly giving for years, my parents' roof repair, the back taxes, even the utility bills, covered anonymously through my LLC. They never asked where the help came from. I never told them. It's time to stop, I said. I don't want to be involved anymore. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally. Diane was silent for a moment. Then, in her usual no-nonsense tone, they're emotionally abusive, Claire, and now financially dependent. But that doesn't mean you owe them your sanity. We started with the basics. She froze the grants linked to their property. cut off the utility subsidies, initiated the formal revocation of all informal financial arrangements. And then came the hardest part. We can proceed with a restraining order, Diane said, especially if you have documentation showing ongoing psychological harm or manipulation. I had it. Text messages, ignored voicemails, screenshots from family group chats where I was systematically excluded. And, of course, the physical wedding invitation. Proof that they sent me a false date for an event that had already happened. It wasn't just a snub. It was a coordinated act of cruelty. 3 weeks later, the court granted a temporary restraining order. No contact, no phone calls, no showing up uninvited, not even social media messages. The court recognized it for what it was: emotional abuse and gaslighting disguised as family dynamics. That same day, Diane served the papers to my parents, my brother, and Eliza. The fallout was immediate. My mother called first, though legally she wasn't supposed to. Her voice came through my voicemail, cracked with disbelief. Claire, what is this? A restraining order? You're overreacting. This is extreme. We're your family. But they weren't. Not anymore. Then came Daniel's messages. Cold, blaming, threatening. You think you're punishing us? You're insane. You're destroying this family. You're pathetic. But none of it mattered anymore. I'd heard the worst they had to offer already. What did catch me off guard, however, was the letter. It arrived in a simple white envelope, addressed by hand, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My father. Claire, I won't fight the restraining order. I won't call. I won't ask for anything. But I need you to know something. I watched them push you out. I saw it happen and I said nothing. That was my failure, not yours. You were always good to us. To me. And I let that slip away because I was too weak to speak up. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to hear it from me. Dad. I read it twice. Then again. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was the first thing anyone in my family had said that felt real. I kept the letter, but I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the next step. The cottage sat on a hill just beyond the edge of town. A modest place with creaky floors and a wraparound porch. It had once belonged to my grandparents, then passed to my mother. When they ran into financial trouble a few years ago, I quietly stepped in and paid off the back taxes, took over the mortgage, and bought her remaining share. Legally, I owned it, but emotionally, they had always treated it like their birthright. It had become their sanctuary in retirement. They never bothered to ask how the repairs were covered, or who paid the overdue bills when the winter heating system failed. I stayed silent, thinking love required sacrifice, thinking they'd see me eventually. But now, the illusion was broken. Diane called me on a Tuesday morning. Claire, the title transfer is clean. You are the sole legal owner of the cottage. Do you want to proceed with eviction? Yes, I said, without hesitation. There was no malice in my decision. No satisfaction. Just peace. We filed the notice. 30 days. That was the deadline. Out of courtesy, and maybe a sliver of lingering guilt, I decided to deliver the notice in person. With Diane and a local sheriff present. Not because I thought there'd be trouble, but because I knew how fragile truth could be when left to interpretation. When we arrived, my father opened the door. He looked older, frailer. Claire, he said, as if the name itself carried a weight. I'm not here to talk. I said calmly. Diane will explain. Diane stepped forward and handed over the formal envelope. Her voice was firm but respectful. Mr. Monroe, this is a legal eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises and return all keys. After that, the locks will be changed. My mother appeared behind him. Her face pale. What is this? She snapped. You're kicking us out? This is our home. No. I replied softly. It's my property. I allowed you to live here. But that time has ended. You can't mean this. She hissed. You're our daughter. You made it clear I wasn't your daughter the day you sent me an invitation to a wedding that had already happened. I said, meeting her eyes. She faltered. My father looked down at the envelope in his hands. We have nowhere to go. He whispered. You can live with Daniel. I said, He made his position clear. Let him take care of you now. My mother shook her head. He doesn't have room. They're going through things. That's not my problem, I said. And it never should have been. You're being cruel, she snapped. No, I corrected her. Cruel is isolating someone their entire life. Cruel is rewriting history to erase me. This, what I'm doing now, is simply drawing a boundary. I turned to leave, but then my father grabbed my arm. Gently. Claire, I'm truly sorry. Can't you give us one more chance? I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as my father, but as a man who had failed to protect his own child from emotional abandonment. A man who stood by while others twisted kindness into weakness. No, I said. You've had more chances than I can count. I stepped back, released his hand, and walked away. 30 days later, they were gone. Quietly. No lawyers. No fights. Just a moving truck. A few dusty boxes. And a silence that felt different than before. This one wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of closure. I sold the cottage shortly after. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed the break. That house was no longer mine. It never truly had been. What I kept was the memory of standing on the front porch, keys in hand, and knowing I had finally claimed my place in the world, not as someone's daughter or sister, but as myself, whole. It was early October. The days had turned crisp. The air carried the scent of falling leaves and distant fireplaces. I had finally found a rhythm, work, peace, space. My condo overlooked a quiet park. And each morning I'd sip my coffee by the window, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I got a call from the front desk of my building. Ms. Monroe, there's a couple in the lobby asking to see you. They said their name is Monroe as well. My heart stuttered. My parents. I hadn't seen them since the eviction. The restraining order was still in place. But technically, as long as they remained in the public space of the building, they weren't violating it. I took a deep breath. I'll be down in 5 minutes. As I stepped into the lobby, I froze. They looked worn. My mother's once flawless blouse was now a faded cardigan. My father's shoes had holes in them. He held a plastic grocery bag with what I guessed were documents or maybe belongings. And for the first time in my life, they looked small. Claire, my mother said softly, voice trembling. She stepped forward, but I held up my hand. Please don't come any closer. You're not supposed to contact me. We know, my father said. We just didn't know what else to do. My voice stayed even. Then speak, quickly. He looked at my mother. She nodded at him. After we left the cottage, we found an apartment, just outside the city. The rent was high, but we managed for a while. Then the car broke down. I couldn't get to my part-time job anymore. We fell behind. And then what? I asked, arms crossed. We're living in a motel now. My mother whispered, just one more week paid up. After that, she didn't finish. I stayed silent, my expression unreadable. We tried to stay with Daniel. My father added, but he and Eliza, they're not in a good place. He told us he couldn't help. That it wasn't his responsibility. A strange twist tugged at my heart. And now, my mother said, with a crack in her voice, we're asking you, because you've always been the one who cared. Please, Claire, just until we get back on our feet. The moment stood frozen. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here for survival. I looked at them, really looked. My father, who once looked the other way while I was pushed aside. My mother, who told me I didn't belong in their peaceful family. And now they stood before me, stripped of all pretense. Why would I help you? I asked, voice quiet. Because we're your parents, my mother said. No, I replied. You've said it yourself. I was never really your daughter. Just a shadow, a ghost at the edge of family photos. A name forgotten. Her lips trembled. We were wrong. You were, I said. But it's too late. You can't mean that. I do. I could see it in their eyes. They had thought my strength was a phase. That I would eventually fold. Like I always had. That my love was unconditional. Eternal. Even when trampled on. But it wasn't. Not anymore. You made it clear. I continued. You didn't want me as family. You used me when it was convenient. And now that the tables have turned, you remember me. But we're suffering, my father said. I suffered too, I replied. Alone. For years. And you watched. You let it happen. My mother broke down. Not into performative sobs, but the kind of quiet crying that happens when the truth finally hits. Just one night, she whispered. Just a warm bed, please. The ache in my chest was deep. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to fix it. But I knew what would happen if I did. The cycle would restart. And I was done being the patch to their sinking ship. I'm sorry, I said. I really am. But I can't help you. My father looked down. My mother looked up, eyes red. Then, what do we do? I stepped back toward the elevator. That's for you to figure out. As the elevator doors slid shut, I saw my mother lower herself onto a lobby bench. Her shoulders trembling. My father stood over her, unsure of what to say. Tears filled my eyes, not from guilt, but from the strange freedom of choosing myself. For the first time, I wasn't saving anyone else. I was saving me. Autumn slowly surrendered to winter. The city transformed, trees stood bare, breath fogged in the air, and golden leaves gave way to the first hush of snow. Inside my condo, things felt still, peaceful. I filled the silence with things that made me whole. Music in the mornings. Candles at night. Long walks under the gray sky. But healing isn't a straight line. It's not a switch you flip. It's 1,000 little choices, daily. Often painful, not to return to what broke you. A month after the confrontation in the lobby, I received a letter in a plain white envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father. It was his 4th letter since the restraining order had taken effect. But something in the tone was different. The desperation was gone. The manipulation, absent. It was softer, slower. Claire, we're living in a 1-bedroom apartment now. I work part-time at a hardware store. Your mother is helping at a senior care facility. It's not glamorous, but we're surviving. We've started therapy, together and individually. For the first time, I'm beginning to understand just how deeply we hurt you. I spent years confusing silence for peace and obedience for love. I'm ashamed, but I'm also grateful you had the strength to walk away. It forced us to face the truth. I don't write to ask for anything, only to tell you, we are trying. Dad. I sat by the window, the letter resting on my lap, snowflakes dusting the glass. It was the first time he had spoken with no expectation, no pressure. Just acknowledgement. Did that mean things were fixed? No. But it meant the healing had begun, on their side. 2. That evening, Aunt Margot called. Your father called me yesterday. She said gently. I got his letter. I replied. He's changing, Claire. I think he really is. I believe you, I said. But I'm not ready. You don't have to be. She said. Everything has its season. Right now, this is yours. She was right. This was my season. For years, I lived in the shadow of a family that only saw my usefulness, never my humanity. I had allowed their approval, or lack of it, to define my worth. But not anymore. I poured that love, that energy, that loyalty, into myself. Work was thriving. My team at the digital agency had grown. And I was recently promoted to Vice President of Strategy. I mentored younger women who reminded me of myself, quiet, overlooked, underestimated. I told them, you don't need to be louder. Just clearer, just stronger in your yes and firmer in your no. I redecorated my condo, repainted the walls, bought a record player, adopted a dog. I stopped waiting for an invitation to belong. I created a space where I did. 3 months later, I received a message from Eliza, my former sister-in-law. Claire, I just wanted to say, I left Daniel, officially. The divorce is in motion. Watching how he treated you, how we all did, was a wake-up call I should have answered sooner. But I finally did. He's not doing well, drinking, isolating, got fired a few weeks ago. I don't share this to hurt you, only to say, I see things now I was blind to before. I'm sorry. Reading her message, I felt no joy, no sense of, I told you so. Just quiet sadness. Some lessons come too late. Others come just in time. A few days later, I walked past Daniel's apartment building. The windows were dark. Mail overflowed from the box downstairs. I paused for a moment, heart torn between the past and the woman I'd become. I could have knocked, but I didn't, because his pain wasn't mine to carry. I walked on. Final reflection. Never invisible again. That winter, as the world hushed under snow, I looked out across the city lights from my window and realized something important. A year ago, I would have done anything, to be welcomed back into my family's embrace. I thought being loved by them would finally make me enough. But I was wrong. My value doesn't live in their eyes. It never did. It lives in how I speak to myself when I'm alone. In how I protect my boundaries. In how I choose peace over performance. Healing over obligation. Maybe one day, I'll open the door to reconciliation. But if I do, it will be on equal terms. No more begging for a seat at the table. No more showing up just to be forgotten. I will never let anyone define my worth again. And I will never be invisible again.